The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting blanket over the quiet beige homes of Norman, Oklahoma, felt like an intrusive spotlight to Madison Holbrook. Barefoot in her upstairs bedroom, she clutched a phone, her other hand part in the blinds, just enough to peer into a neighbor's yard. 911, what's your emergency? The calm voice on the other end felt miles away, muffled by the frantic beat of her own heart. There's a man outside my neighbor's house, she whispered, her voice tight with a self-imposed urgency. I think he's trying to break in. He's messing with something by the wires, like tools and stuff. Her gaze narrowed with a mix of suspicion and a strange, almost exhilarating sense of duty. Focused on the figure, crouching near the utility box of the house next door. He was a black man, she noted. Mid-30s, maybe, wearing a hoodie and jeans. Tall, completely absorbed in twisting wires with some kind of small device. The dispatcher's voice steady and unhurried, cut through erasing thoughts. Can you describe him? Yeah. Madison squinted again, as if the act of looking harder would solidify her vague suspicions into concrete proof. He's on the side of the house near the meter box or something. A pause. Do you know if he lives there? Her breath hitched. No. I mean, I don't think so. The guy who used to live there moved out last month. I don't recognize this one. The words felt thin, flimsy, even to her own ears. It wasn't entirely true. She had seen him a couple of times, pulling into the driveway in a black Toyota, jogging early in the morning. But they'd never exchange greetings, never wave, and now this. The sight of him intently focused on the wiring, twisting and adjusting, sparked a flicker of unease that quickly escalated into conviction. What if he wasn't supposed to be there? The thought, once planted, germinated rapidly into a self-righteous certainty. She was just being cautious, she told herself, responsible. Even a sliver of guilt, a fleeting whisper of doubt, tugged at her. But she aggressively pushed it down. She imagined cutting power, disabling cameras. The dispatcher's calm voice returned, a balm to her manufactured anxiety. Officers are on the way. Stay inside and don't engage. Madison's heart thumped a strange rhythm, a blend of anxiety and a potent, almost addictive sense of control. She was helping, she was doing the right thing. Down the hall, her mom called out, "Everything okay, Mad?" Madison shouted back a practiced, confident lie, "Yeah, I'm fine." She didn't want to explain. Not yet, not until it was confirmed. Until the flashing lights and blaring sirens validated her suspicions. And then came the sound, a distant whoop. Faint at first, then growing closer. Closer until it swelled into a deafening crescendo. On a quiet tree-lined street. Madison pressed her face against the glass again. The man was still there, still working. He hadn't noticed. Not yet, but he would soon. And as the first Norman police SUV turned the corner, its lights a silent, urgent promise, Madison felt a perverse thrill, a strange satisfaction. She had made this happen. She was in charge. What she couldn't know, however, was that this single misguided act, born of a fleeting suspicion and a deeply ingrained, unspoken prejudice, was about to set off a chain of events that would expose not just wires, but the uncomfortable hidden truths of an entire neighborhood. Darius Whitfield wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. The Oklahoma heat, even in late spring, clung to his skin like a second layer. Crouched beside the cool gray siding of his new home, he squinted at the stubborn tangle of cables. "Come on, man," he muttered, wrestling with the new Wi-Fi extender that needed hard wiring. Next to the utility box, it was a simple job, one he could have paid someone else for. But why tech was his life. He built networks for companies twice the size of this entire block. He gave the Ethernet cable a firm tug, tightened the screw, then leaned back on his heels, pulling out his phone to check the signal. Still nothing. A sigh escaped him, heavy with a frustration that had nothing to do with the wires, and everything to do with the quiet, almost palpable detachment of his new neighborhood. He bought this house for the space, the schools, the quiet after years packed into apartments in Dallas and growing up in Baton Rouge. Owning this home was more than a win. It was a testament to every late night and every sacrifice. Yet in the 2 weeks since he'd moved in, few neighbors had offered more than a polite nod or a brief wave. Mostly older families, mostly white. He didn't mind, not really. He was used to being the new guy, knew how to keep to himself. But as he double-checked the cable, a faint twinge of paranoia pricked him. A feeling like someone was watching. He turned slowly, scanning the empty street, then shook it off. Just nerves, he told himself. The usual stress of settling into a new place. He was just dusting off his jeans as a distant wail broke the stillness. Sirens. His brows furrowed. That was close. Too close. A moment later, a Norman police SUV turned the corner, its lights flashing, followed by another. They slowed, then stopped right in front of his house. Darius blinked, his hands instinctively rising a little. Still clutching the small screwdriver, he took a cautious step back from the wall, letting his arms hang loosely by his sides. 2 officers emerged from the first cruiser. A white man in his late 40s, all buzz cut and sunglasses, and a younger black woman, her hair pulled back tight under her cap. Both wore the crisp navy blue of the Norman PD. "Sir, can you step away from the side of the house?" the man barked, his voice sharp. Devoid of any preamble, Darius raised his hands fully. "Now this is my house. I live here." "Sir, we got a report of suspicious activity," the man continued, undertow, his eyes scanning Darius as if he expected a weapon to materialize. "Tools, wires. Something about the meter box. I'm installing a Wi-Fi extender," Darius explained, his voice calm even. "I just switched to a new ISP. I'm not doing anything illegal." The woman officer, whose name tag read Nguyen, narrowed her eyes slightly. "Do you have ID on you?" "It's inside, look. The garage is open, my car's in there. Mail's on the porch, this is my property." But they didn't move. The male officer reached for his radio, speaking into it words Darius couldn't discern. Darius's heart pounded not from guilt, but from a weary familiarity. He'd seen the script play out on news clips too many times, and now here he was living it. Officer Nguyen stepped forward. "You said you live here. What's your name?" "Darius Whitfield. I closed on this place 2 weeks ago." She paused. "Can I check that against county records?" "Be my guest." Darius gestured towards her partner. The male officer muttered something and walked back to his car. Nguyen stayed. "I'm not trying to escalate," Darius said, his voice measured. "I just don't understand how tightening a couple wires outside my own house gets me police attention." Nguyen tilted her head, studying him. "Neither do I, but we've had a few calls from this area lately. People jumpy, sometimes too quick to call." A cynical sigh escaped Darius' figures. But even as Newman was checking records, and her partner remained stubbornly suspicious, something was stirring in the passenger seat of the second patrol car that would soon unravel this mundane, yet deeply unsettling encounter. Detective Colin Newman sat in the passenger seat of the second cruiser, her laptop balanced on her knees, a quiet storm brewing behind a calm facade. Her partner, Officer Landon Briggs, had already made his judgment. She could tell the tight posture, the firm voice, the eye scanning derisively of a weapon might materialize at any moment. But Carl was different. She had learned long ago that surface impressions rarely told the full story, especially not in a neighborhood that on the surface hummed with suburban tranquility. Something about this whole thing simply wasn't adding up. She clicked through the dispatch records again, the glowing screen illuminating the faint lines of concern etched around her eyes. Same address, same color. Madison Holbrook 3 times in the last month. 2 unknown individuals near property lines. 1 unfamiliar car parked too long. All vague, all unfounded. All closed out as non-incidents. And now this. Carl glanced out at the young man standing calmly by his new home. His hands now lowered, a small screwdriver still clutched in one. His car matched the driveway. His name matched the deed. His demeanor didn't scream threat. He looked annoyed, a little tired, but remarkably composed under the circumstances. Carl stepped out of the cruiser, moving with a deliberate ease. "Careful not to crowd him. You said your name's Darius Whitfield?" she asked, her voice quiet, a stark contrast to Briggs's earlier bark. "Yes." "And you moved in when?" 2 weeks ago. "Do you have anything with your name on it inside the house? Even mail?" He nodded. "Yeah. I can grab it. I just didn't want to move." While Darius gestured subtly toward Briggs. Things were tense. Carl gave a half smile, a small acknowledgement of the unspoken tension. "Understandable." Briggs strode up, cutting in a dismissive wave of his hand. "No warrant's name matches a property owner. But we still have to check out the caller's report." "Cola said you were tampering with utilities." Cola stated, her gaze holding Darius's. Darius gestured toward the cables again. I'm installing a Wi-Fi extender. If I wanted to steal power, I wouldn't be doing it in broad daylight, with a screwdriver and a Home Depot bag. Briggs narrowed his eyes. Mind if we take a look inside the house? Darius looked from Briggs to Kala, a question in his eyes. Do I have to let you? Carla shook her head, her voice firm. Not unless we have probable cause. And we don't. There was a beat of awkward silence. Briggs didn't like that answer, his face tightening, but Carla wasn't budging. Darius lowered his hand slowly. I'll get the mail, 1 second. He walked to the porch, careful not to move too fast. Picked up 3 letters and held them up, all addressed to him. Briggs finally backed off. All right, you're free to go. But Darius didn't move, his stance unyielding. You showed up like I was a criminal. No apology, no explanation. Briggs, already turning to walk back to his car, offered no response. Carla stayed. I get it, she said quietly, her voice empathetic. This wasn't the best way to introduce ourselves. You think? Darius scoffed, folding the mail. I also think you're not the first person to deal with this. And something tells me you won't be the last. It's always the same story. Darius continued, his voice laced with weary resignation. Someone sees a black man with tools and assumes we're breaking into something instead of fixing it. Carla looked toward the Holbrook house, where Madison was now barely visible, peeking through the blinds. You got kids? She asked, her gaze still fixed on the window. No, not yet. Well, if you ever do. Carl's voice softened. I hope they get to grow up in a place where people ask questions before they make assumptions. She gave him a nod in time to go. Darius stood there for a second, jaw clenched, phone still in his pocket. He didn't take pictures, didn't film the interaction. He wanted to, but something about this neighborhood, this quiet, insidious pattern, made him hesitate. Kala climbed back into the cruiser. You done playing social worker? Briggs asked, a hint of disdain in his voice. She didn't respond. She just tapped the screen and pulled up the caller's info again. Same number, same girl. Madison Holbrook. Her name didn't raise flags, but the pattern did. Nguyen's eyes narrowed. 3 calls about suspicious black males in a neighborhood where there had only been one new black family move in. She picked up a phone and called it in. Yeah, I need the incident logs to the Holbrook address, all the way back to January, if you can swing it. Just as Newman was about to drive away, her phone buzzed again. The text from record confirmed her worst suspicions. 8 total calls from the Holbrook address in the last 5 months. 6 involved black males, none resulted in citations, arrests, or confirmed suspicious activity. Carla stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deeply ingrained, almost unconscious pattern of prejudice. And it was about to push this seemingly minor incident into a territory far more significant than anyone could have imagined. Madison's house wasn't far. Just 3 manicured lawns down from Darius's. A neat gray two-story with blooming flower beds. A porch swing and a silver Honda parked in the drive. It looked like any other house on the street. Quiet, normal. A picture of suburban peace. Carlin Newman walked up the path and rang the bell a few seconds later. The door opened to reveal Mr. Holbrook. Early 40s with a cautious expression. Behind him, peeking from the hallway, stood Madison. Arms crossed, eyes wide and wary. Detective Nguyen. Kyla introduced herself, flashing her badge. Mind if I ask a few questions about a 911 call made today? Sure, he said, stepping aside. Come in. The air conditioning hummed softly inside, a stark contrast to the simmering tension. Family photos lined the hallway walls. Beach trips, graduations, softball trophies, an almost perfect American facade. Is this about the guy next door? Mr. Holbrook asked, his voice laced with a defensiveness that immediately put Carla on alert. Before he could answer, Madison's voice cut in, sharp and quick. I didn't know he lived there. I thought he was breaking in. Carla turned to the teenager, her gaze steady. Can you tell me exactly what you saw? I saw him messing with wires. I panicked. I just thought. I mean, I didn't recognize him. Madison looked down, picking at a loose thread on her hoodie. Have you seen him before? Kyle pressed gently. Madison hesitated. Once or twice maybe, but he never said hi. Carla took a slow, deliberate breath. This was the moment we looked into POSCO logs. Your number's been linked to multiple reports over the past few months, all involving Black individuals, and none of them turned out to be criminal activity. Silence fell thick and uncomfortable, broken only by the hum of the AC. Mr. Holbrook rubbed the back of his neck. A nervous gesture. We've just been trying to keep the neighborhood safe. That's all. Safe from what exactly? Carla asked, her voice still gentle, but with an underlying steel. Madison spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. People walking their dogs, sitting in cars. She looked up, her eyes pleading. I didn't mean for it to become a thing. I just thought I was doing the right thing. You want? Carla said plainly, her voice devoid of judgment but firm in its truth. You could have gotten that man hurt or worse. He was doing basic home maintenance. And now he's dealing with the embarrassment and stress of being accused in front of his own house. Madison looked stunned, like no one had ever told her she was wrong in such a direct way. The carefully constructed bubble of her assumptions had just been pricked. Do you know what happens when coals like this keep stacking up? Carla continued, her voice gaining intensity. People lose trust in the system. Good officers get distracted chasing ghosts. And people, like your neighbor, feel like they don't belong in their own homes. Mr. Holbrook's voice rose, more defensive this time. Are you saying she shouldn't call? When something looks off, she should call or affirmed. Firm but calm. But she should also ask herself why it looked off in the first place. Would she have called if he looked like me? Like you. That question hung in the air like smoke, filling the quiet, meticulously decorated living room with an uncomfortable truth. Madison's eyes began to water. She turned her face away. I didn't mean. I know, Carla said softly. But it's not about meaning well. It's about the damage done. She let the silence add a moment longer, allowing the weight of her words to settle. If I bring him here, your neighbor, would you be willing to speak to him directly? Madison looked at her father. He nodded slowly, a profound weariness in his eyes. Yes, I think that would be good. Carla left the house not because she was done, but because she knew the next conversation had to happen face to face. And Darius deserved to be part of it. The confrontation had cracked the facade. But the real work, the raw, uncomfortable truth, was yet to be spoken between the people most affected. The roots of prejudice, deeply embedded and often unconscious, had been exposed, and the path to real understanding would demand more than just apologies. It would demand a willingness to confront uncomfortable self-reflection. Darius was on his porch, arms folded, staring out at the street. He looked like he was waiting for something, or someone, to make sense of the absurdity he'd just endured. A neighbor across the street, pulling into their driveway, offered a quick, awkward nod. Darius didn't return it. Detective Newman walked up the path, her steps deliberate. You mind if I sit? She asked. Darius didn't answer immediately, but after a moment he gestured to the other patio chair. She said, today they send you to smooth it over? He asked, his eyes still fixed on the street. No, she said, her voice steady. I came because you deserve to know what's going on. She pulled a folded printout from her pocket. This is a list of every 911 call placed by the Holbrook household in the last 5 months. 8 total. 6 about Black individuals who were later cleared of any wrongdoing. Darius took the paper, his gaze sweeping over it in silence. 3 calls were about people walking past their property. 1 was a delivery guy, 1 was a kid selling fundraiser candy. The rest people like you outside doing normal stuff. He sighed a low, frustrated sound and leaned back in his chair. So it's not about me, it's about people like me. I'd say that's accurate, new and confirmed. He was quiet again. I've lived a version of this before. In Dallas, I had a neighbor call the cop because I had my hood up, working on my car. Another time in Baton Rouge, someone asked if I was a landscaper when I was out front watering my own grass. Knew and gave a small dry chuckle. I've had people assume I was a nanny picking up my own niece. Darius nodded. It wears on you. I know. He looked over at her. So what now? I spoke to Madison and her father. She's shaken, but I told them the truth about the patent, about how dangerous it can be. Darius tilted his head. She's scared. Yeah, but not in the way she thought she was before. There was a long pause between them. Then Nguyen added, they've agreed to talk with you face to face. Darius's jaw tightened. Not sure I've got that in me today. You don't have to, I can take care of it. But he stood slowly. No. He said, let's do it. Newman nodded. They walked together 3 houses down. As they reached the Holbrook door, it opened before they could even knock. Madison stood there looking smaller than she had earlier. Her father behind her. Darius took a breath. Madison started to speak, but her voice caught. She tried again. I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't think. I just saw someone I didn't know doing something I didn't understand. And I reacted. Darius didn't yell, didn't lecture. He just looked at her, his voice low and steady. You know how humiliating it is to have to explain yourself on your own front lawn. To be seen as a threat for holding a screwdriver. Madison nodded, her face red. I do now. Mr. Holbrook stepped forward. We take responsibility and we want to do better. Wanting isn't enough, Darius replied. It's the doing that matters. Madison met his eyes. And help us, tell us what to do differently. Darius paused, then said, stop by saying hello next time when you see someone you don't know. Maybe don't assume the worst. Maybe ask who they are. Maybe realize they might be just like you, trying to live. Newman watched quietly from the steps. That's all I've got for today. He turned and walked back down the path. Slower this time, but steady. Newman followed when they reached his house again. Darius looked back once more. The Holbrooks was still standing in the doorway watching. They seemed sincere, Newman said. They always do when the heat's on. Darius replied, a wry note in his voice. You think she meant it? I think she's 17 and this world taught her something it shouldn't have. Newman paused, but the hardest part wasn't the apology. It was what came after, when the news died down. And the neighborhood had to sit with what it really was that night. The neighborhood group chat lit up. Anyone else see the cops earlier? What happened over on Elm? Everything okay with the new guy? Darius wasn't in the chat. He wasn't invited, but word spread quickly. In Crestview Park, most folks didn't say anything out loud. They never did. They keep their thoughts to themselves. Whisper them in kitchens or mutter them during dog walks. But the silence now, it was louder than anything. Newman filed a report and went home late. She didn't need to stay longer. The pieces were in motion. What came next wasn't a matter of policing. It was a matter of people. The following weekend, Crestview Park hosted its usual welcome social. Darius showed up alone. No one approached him at first. They just smiled, offered brief nods. Safe gestures, the kind that kept things nice. Madison arrived with her parents. She saw Darius near the snack table and walked over. Hey, she said. He glanced sideways. Hey. I'm glad you came. He gave a short nod. It's my neighborhood too. Madison looked down, took a breath. I've been thinking about what you said and what I assumed that day. It wasn't just about you, it was about how I see people I don't know. And I'm trying to fix that. Darius studied her for a moment. That's good. She shifted her weight. Would you maybe come speak at school sometime about what happened? He raised an eyebrow. You sure your school wants to hear that kind of truth? I don't know, she said. But I think they need to. Darius looked back toward the other neighbors. A few were watching, pretending not to. All right, he said. If they'll have me, I'll come. Her face lit up just a little. Thank you. She turned to walk away, then stopped. Hey, one more thing. I know you don't owe me anything. But I'm really sorry for what I started that day. He paused. You didn't just make a phone call. He said you made a decision. And that decision could have cost me more than just a peaceful afternoon. I'm alive to talk about it. A lot of people aren't. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She just nodded, then walked back to her parent. Across the lawn, Detective Newman, who had arrived with her niece, caught Darius's eye and gave a quick two-finger wave. He smiled back. This time he walked over. How's it feel, Matthew? She asked, like everybody's trying not to say the thing out loud. Yeah, that's about right. A neighbor, Mr. Renshaw, finally walked up and extended a hand. Darius, right, heard you're the new guy. Sorry we haven't stopped by sooner. Darius shook his hand. Appreciate it. They chatted for a minute. Then another neighbor joined in, and another. It wasn't an apology, not directly. But it was something, and Darius could feel it shift just a little. Not a celebration, not forgiveness. Just people showing up when they didn't have to. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, kids ran through sprinklers, laughter replacing tension. For the first time since moving in, Darius felt like he wasn't just surviving in the neighborhood. He was part of it, not because he proved anything, but because someone finally listened. But even after the lemonade dried up and the folding chairs were packed away, one truth remained: nothing changes unless people stop hiding behind silence and start facing the mirror. Weeks passed. No more sirens. No more sideways glances from across the street. Darius started to notice the small changes. First, Mr. Renshaw waved without hesitation. Now the older couple next door brought over fresh tomatoes from their backyard garden. A kid from down the block knocked on his door, selling chocolate bars for the school band he bought for. It wasn't a transformation. The air didn't suddenly clear. There were still looks, still hesitations. But the silence was thinner now. And for the first time, it felt like people were willing to sit in the discomfort a little longer instead of rushing past it. Madison followed through. She invited him to her high school civics class. He stood in front of 30 juniors and told his story about that afternoon. About the screwdriver. About how quickly people's fear can outpace their facts. And they listened, really listened. Some students asked questions. Others said nothing. But when he walked out, the teacher, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, shook his hand and said, I think that meant more than you know. Madison sent him a thank you card the next day. She didn't have to, but she did. Detective Newman kept in touch. She swung by now and then, always without warning, sometimes just to say hello. Once she brought her niece again. They talked on the porch about college, coffee, and what it means to be safe in a place that was never built with you in mind. Darius still had the paper with the list of calls from the Holbrooks. He kept it folded in the drawer by the front door. Not out of spite, but as a reminder. Because forgetting is easy when it's not your story. And that was the real problem. The truth is, what happened that day wasn't rare. It didn't go viral, no protests, no news crews. Just one more black man questioned for existing, where someone thought he didn't belong. But it could have gone differently. And that's the part that stuck with him the most. It almost did, so what now? Now it's not just about Darius. It's about everyone watching this. Everyone who's ever looked out a window and made a call based on fear before facts. Everyone who's ever chosen silence when they could have spoken up. Everyone who's ever convinced themselves that not meaning harm was the same thing as doing no harm. It's not accountability starts where comfort ends. And progress, it doesn't show up all at once. It shows up in moments, conversations on porches, awkward truths spoken out loud, teenagers willing to learn what the world never taught them right the first time.